Hi there, I'm pedrogoes, and this is the 10x Your Character podcast, a dialogue experience in which I interview millennials and post-millennials from different backgrounds with the goal to inspire you to become a responsible individual in society.
Try to catch me howling at the moon.
Hey everyone, hope you guys are staying well, safe, and that you guys are, thinking about everything that's going on this year. It's been a tough year for all of us, but tough moments that I've learned to realize and learn from experience shapes us, and is always an opportunity for us to shape our character and become better individuals for ourselves and those around us. Today's a very unique and I would say special episode just because I'm speaking with a recent graduate of UCLA, class of 2020. His name is Matthew Abikenari. He graduated with a pre-medical emphasis. He did his honors thesis in critique of moral relativism, and he's currently studying for the MCAT, while he's also staying up to date with the apparent deficiencies of our culture. This episode is very deep, very detailed, and we share a lot of I believe that things that we all millennials, I would say from the age of 16 to even almost 30, go through at some point. But I don't think it's topics that we are comfortable or even aware that we go through this things in our lifetime. For example, we talk about parents, wanting their kids to live a life that they never got to live, or how we see that there are students that are going through amazing institutions like UCLA and coming out unchanged, the same person. So we go in detail about some of the deficiencies that we see in our culture, but also what are some of the solutions that we can take on the responsibility as individuals to address these deficiencies, both on the individual level, but also on a societal level, and in our structure of our culture. So I highly encourage that if you're a millennial or post-millennial, as I said, from the ages of about 16 to even, close to 30, that you dig deep and listen to this episode. I think that there's incredible value, incredible message, and just intellectual conversation between me and Matthew. Matthew is a guy that I've met in high school, and just seeing his progress and growth as an individual has inspired me to do the same. So I highly encourage you to take notes and just listen to it carefully and try to process and think for yourself as you see our opinions and our discussion. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode, guys, and take care.
Hope they won't shoot me down soon.
Hey Matthew, how's it going, my man?
Good. How are you, Pedro? My friend?
Didn't know.
The first day you walked into U.S. soil.
Yeah, dude. How long we know each other? Like 5 years.
8 years.
You
walked?
Not 8 years.
Yeah,
I've been here for 7.
7 years then.
Yeah.
Near 8 because
we had
English learner class in high school.
Oh man, what a time, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Have we progressed since then? I hope
definitely,
so.
Yeah, for sure.
So before we get in today's topic, which I think it's gonna be a very, very long talk, very long discussion. Who are you? What are you interested in? What are you currently, talk about some of your accomplishments, which we have discussed prior to starting recording.
You want me to start?
Yeah.
Well, I'm Matthew. I just graduated UCLA with a pre-medical emphasis. I was really interested in psychology, neuroscience, cognitive science during the undergraduate years. And, now it all ended a bit catastrophically as everything went on, but then I'm studying for the MCAT this summer, and then I'm applying next application cycle. And I'm interested in doing MD, PhD programs, not joint, not simultaneously, different periods, time frames, but
yeah,
I'm interested in doing research as well as practice. Yeah, definitely neuroscience.
That's good, man. Just wanted to say prior to starting that, like, I'm really proud of who you've become so far, and I know you're gonna become so much more than you are today.
I really
Um,
appreciate that.
I think it brings hope into my life when I see people like you, your brother Derek, and even people like Yavar. Um, growing up in high school and seeing how there's there's that level of innocence and level of like um, wanting to kind of look good and individually, but progressing from that and seeing that, like, let me figure out what my path is, uh, and take action towards that. And I've seen that in your life, and it truly brings hope to into what I do, and just in general seeing that there's a possibility for someone to become more than they are.
Yeah, totally. I appreciate that, and I feel so the same. I mean, high school, it's got a really interesting narrative because, it's very binary. You either like have certain traits or have certain capacities embedded in you during the high school years, or you don't. And your social interactions will be completely contingent on that, whether you have that or not. But like, are you part of the pack or outside the pack? Being in sports, we were both in a lot of sports. And it's funny because we both came from different countries. We got into sports that was very effective and very useful and brought a lot of camaraderie. But if you think about it, in college, it's a completely different thing, or outside of college. Like, there's a niche for every certain area, every particular interest you have in life. And that transition I think it's profound because, like, you're taking the emphasis from the collective to the individual in the most pragmatic sense. People are pursuing, like, you have students even within cultures who are very, like, pragmatic. Oh, you either have to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, or you have to be very practical in life. You see them go through college, be exposed to a single class or a single professor, and that changes the entire trajectory of their life. They're like, I'm interested in music, I'm interested in Greek mythology, and this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I just want to pursue my life from this point on after, and I don't care, like, what are the expectations of my culture or my ancestry. I'm interested in pursuing something like this that resonates with me so personally. And that is a very profound thing, because I mean, it's very interesting where interest comes from, right? Like, it's not clear to me, like, why you're interested in certain things. Like, what is it you're interested in doing podcasts or engaging in these intellectual conversations or whatnot, or even friendly conversations? Like, what motivates you to do that? Why are you not right now doing something totally different? Why are you not
at the beach
exercising or at the beach, or like, why are you approaching life in this way? It's not so clear to me how, like, how you consciously chose that. So I think, like, individuating in that way, like, I see my friends and people who are not particularly close friends of mine, like, individuate in this very peculiar way, and I just think that's unbelievably interesting. Coming from high school to college.
It's a very intense period. There's a lot of, depending, like, let's talk about even your culture, right? Coming from Iran, would you say it's a very honor and shame culture? Because if you look at the Middle East and even Asian cultures, it's a very honor and shame culture. Like, as you said, you're going to become a lawyer, or those specific things that people look up to, and that specific route. And if you choose to deviate from that, you automatically seen as like something less than the other individuals. I don't know if that's where you come from.
I think so. I think, like, there's, like, multiple layers. One layer, like, dominates over the other. There's this underlying, like, cultural forces, like the Persian culture, the Asian culture, whatever culture you believe in, like, it permeates in the structure of the parents' lives, right? And some of them have that, some of them don't. But they do have this intention of, like, bringing on to the next generation of their own kids. And some of them, you see this quite often, where the parents, like, imagine a certain way for their life, a certain expectation for their life, and it quite didn't get fulfilled because they were going through this immigration phenomena. But then, for some unknown reason, some absurd way, they want to enforce that on their own children.
Under the kid.
And they're like,
wow,
because
dude.
I wasn't able to do this, you should do this. We've done all this we've undergone all this tremendous sacrifice for you. All you can do is return the favor, even though the actual individual child is not interested even in the slightest. in these trajectories, they're like enforcing upon him or her.
That's a great point, man. I was
Yeah,
literally talking to a friend about that exact point, in which it seems funny because when you look at the parents in this transition from high school to college, or even earlier, because they're ready, as you said, it's as if they're trying to have the kid build a life that they never got to build. They want. It's as if they want their kid to live the life that they never got to live, or it's a way to show other parents, like, the favorite thing for mom is to sit down in dinner and say, my kid is going to UCLA. And it doesn't really matter if the kid is happy studying whatever he's studying. It's just for the fact that he's going through that path. And it's I think that the consequences of that are very harmful, and it often causes resentment from the kid to the parents, because let's say I know that it's a personal choice to pursue everything that you are pursuing. Let's say if it was not, and after 8 years from now you're completely miserable. Maybe you're making a good sum of money, financially you're successful, but other areas of your life are a catastrophe. And you're going to look at who are you going to blame? You're not going to blame yourself, because deep down you already knew the other interests you had, but you chose to pursue something that your parents wanted for you. And to me, I'd rather disappoint my parents if they were to be disappointed towards the path that I chose to pursue now, because it's a very small disappointment compared to the disappointment that I would have towards them, to try to kind of like pushing me towards following a path that I knew that intrinsically was never something that was in me. And I think that it's a very important thing for people that are going to listen to this in our generation, because I've seen it and I've been a victim of it in the sense that when I was moving towards college, the decisions that I was making, even when I started going to Santa Monica College, was towards things that, particularly my mom had envisioned for me. And, like, hey, like, you're going to study business and you're going to, go to the office and you're going to work for someone and you're going to build a great family. And the reason why you're going to be able to marry a good woman is because you have a quality job. And then that good woman and you are going to produce quality kids, and the cycle goes on.
Yeah, totally. I mean, first, I would say that, well, a lot of times, like, the actual dimensions of any culture, like, the parents or the generation that's enforcing these expectations on the kids aren't aware of it, right? Like, your mom, for example, like, she has very good intentions, right? Like, she perceives this pathway for you. She has very good intentions and she wants you to do well. Jung wrote tremendously about this, the collective unconscious, and like, these cultural forces permeate in the unconscious minds of our parents, even coming from completely different geographies, right? Completely different locations. But they all have the same pattern, whether you go Asia, whether you go South America, North America. Like, the expectation for a lot of good parents is very good intentions to have this very meaningful trajectory in life. But the issue is that so it's purely unconscious a lot of times. And there are cases where it's not. It's very, like, on the pernicious part of the parent to just want to antagonize the child. You either do this or you get out of the house. I think in those cases, that is quite wrong. And we can get into that later. But for the majority of what encapsulates parents is like, we want our kids to do well. And we want to impose these structures because they have been historically known to work really well. But the issue is that part of what you want as a parent is to have this very symbiotic relationship with your child where it's constantly fruitful and constantly rewarding, and the entire trajectory of his or her life, you have this relationship and it's building up. And part of that is you give the structures to their life to support them and to encourage them to individuate in their own life, but you don't impose a narrative on their life. It's not so clear how that would be entirely fruitful for the life of the individual child, because the child can experiences life differently at moment to moment.
Yeah,
Hour to
everyone's
hour.
different. That's what I think Carl Jung really focuses on, the individual, right? He says that like there's a difference between, there's the facts, and then there's the understanding. There's the, kind of the empathy. And I think you make such a good point. Like my mom, for example, she was very opposed against my decision to not pursue college or academics in the traditional route. But her intentions for me were completely positive. Like there was no negative thing behind it in her intentions. But the thing is, I think that the parents in this case, they have a great end vision. Like they want to see their kids successful in various aspects of life, but then they make up this means to get there, in which is like maybe for certain culture, lawyer, doctor, whatever it is, to get you to that means, which is the successful life with a happy family. But they don't understand sometimes, or they overlook the fact that maybe if the kid becomes a lawyer, which intrinsically he has no interest towards becoming, the actual end will be very probably the opposite of what she envisions for her child. It's probably going to be an abusive relationship because he's so angry and he hates his job. He'll get into an abusive relationship with someone. He probably won't be able to control himself. And then divorce happens. The kids grow up without parents together, and then the kids end up being a mess. Get on drugs, follow the wrong influencers. They have no support or direction from the parents, so it can lead very into paths that like we can probably not even describe today.
Yeah, I mean there's almost elements of internal repression when you see the parents like almost enforcing on the child. These are the only narratives that you can play in your life, and if you deviate from them in the slightest, like you'll be miserable, or you'll fall off the wagon, or all sorts of things will go wrong in place. And I feel like the fear of that can be very energizing, and the child ends up pursuing it, but you're not directly focusing the attention, the locus on the individual, because like especially like kids or even young adults going in college and thereafter, like they have this innocence of like this cortical innocence. And I'm gonna say what I mean by that is that like you're at a particular niche in your life for like the interest of your life, what interests you is beginning to emerge out of your unconscious. And if you're at an age where you have the proper support system, like once it emerges, you're able to witness it, and you'll be able to build up upon that. And it's very likely, if you pay attention to it, it'll take you places that you never imagined you could go, but you find yourself going, and you realize not only that, you're actually very contributing to it in a great deal. If you have these support structures, you realize I'm pursuing writing Greek novels, and I really enjoy it, and I've read all these amazing books throughout the generations based on that, and I attend these amazing lectures, and I interact in these subtle ways with my professors, and I love the way they discuss these things, and I know I can contribute. So you end up like it's a consistently unfolding miracle where you end up becoming even more and more and more interested in it. But imagine someone's doing that, and at the end of college, at the dawn of graduation, their parents or some sort of influence in their life, they're like, well, how can you monetize the value of that kind of education? Studying Greek mythology, what are you going to do with that? And I think that's actually quite wrong and incorrect, because first of all, it's not so clear how like you can extract economic values from majors, because extracting economic values has to be based on the individual person, and you have to look at their attributes. You have to look at what they're capable of and the connections they have and the trajectory they're pursuing right after college. And yes, it's quite easy to say, like, for someone who's a physician, who's going to be a physician or a lawyer, they're going to make just from naturally looking at it, it's quite possible for you to assume that
they'll make more economic than let's say someone that's poetry.
Motility, exactly. Yeah. But that is actually very much so incorrect, because a lot of times why people perceive these occupations are desirable is because the satisfaction, the stability of the structure of the life that comes with that. But this is paradoxical, because someone who is pursuing poetry like so intimately and so passionately it's very possible the way occupations work isn't this 3-second imagination you have about the job and you want to pursue it. It's actually moment to moment experience. It's
Wow.
the interactions you have. It's interactions that build up the next day. It's social. It's
That's a great
motivational.
point.
It's very different than what people think. It's not physical at all, right? Like you perceive a certain job. We can stick with poetry. Like the actual what defines what constitutes the structure of this occupation isn't the monetization that constantly happens. It's the interaction you have day to day, right? It's the sitting at home and writing the poem, or it's the actual doing of the task.
Yeah.
And that satisfaction of work and life comes from moment to moment of that. But you can, by the same token, take a lawyer who's getting very well paid, goes to an amazing institution, and has, from the outside, has all sorts of structures in their lives. So that they're in a very respectable point in society, and they're in this structure, right? Both of their foot is in the structure, and they have this stable occupation. And from the outside, there's so much like stability that you can perceive from that. But when you look at inside, if someone who isn't properly motivated to pursue this occupation, somehow they've been enforced by their parents or the allure of their culture, I can't imagine what moment to moment feels like. Doing all that paperwork, having all those interactions. Perhaps you don't even have like
Meaningful.
the proper personality to want to be engaged in those environments, because we know like a lot of law firms require very long hours. They require you to be somewhat disagreeable.
Yeah.
They require you to be
A good friend of mine,
totally.
she's an attorney, and she's told me, her daughter is also an attorney, and she's told me that like her daughter's friends, some of them are miserable because they have this huge loan that they're carrying, and they're working 19-hour day jobs or 18-hour days. They go to the office, they leave at 9 p.m. They have to come home and still work from home, and they're miserable. So I think you bring out a great point, which is the personality. Unfortunately, like, there's so much self-help in this idea in this postmodern world that you can be anything you want to be. And it's like, there could maybe be true. Not actually, that's completely not true. But even if it was slightly true, who said you should be that thing in which the society or people are telling you should be? Right? Because that you bring out the great point, like you say, oh, I'm gonna go become a lawyer, but your personality may not correlate, and you may actually be an awful lawyer, or maybe you're making money because there's a huge necessity for lawyers, because that's what people think. It's like, oh, automatically because you're making money that you're doing a good job. Not necessarily. You can be actually very incompetent, not competent at all at what you do, but because there's so much desire or demand for that specific thing, you, as a consequence, make money off of it. But, even you said like the stability of the job. I think even a lot of lawyers experience lack of stability right now under COVID. And that brings me to, the first point, which I think right now everyone has had the opportunity to sit down in boredom and really contemplate on what it is that they're doing with their lives. And, what is the meaning of life? Or is there a meaning to life? Or is what I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Or am I just following trends or following cultural pressure upon the trajectory that I'm traveling with my life? And I think it also starts to question, what is truth? Is there truth? Is truth subjective? Is truth objective? Do we all find our own ways through life? Is there a specific path that we should follow? Or is there standards that actually help the individual flourish under the existence, the reality of existence? What do you think about that? Because it's very funny to me when I speak with some people in our generation, how they're like, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me. Or, like everything's subjective. I'm going to create my own reality. I'm going to create my own meaning. And the problem I find with that is that those same people that they seem to have created this this set of morals or principles that they try to follow, they get very upset by other people's principles or ways of living. And this is what I think breaks the theory that could be true, is that, let's say I say that you should treat people with respect, and you come here and you disrespect me, and I get upset about that. But subjectively, you say that it's okay to disrespect people, and under your set of standards, that's okay. How can I become upset and say that you're wrong when I just said that everything's subjective?
Yeah, totally. I think you brought an excellent point, like that, and the whole narrative of COVID. I mean, I think COVID, just its rise and its like elongation is super interesting because, a novel permutation of a few biomolecules, just something we haven't experienced, has catastrophismically destroyed the entire economic, social, political, and biomedical infrastructure that the greatest minds of history have built for the past 200-300 years in the modern era. And it's unbelievable to see that you bring this notion of truth. I feel like right now is the most unbelievable time to examine what truth actually means, because we have these objective, profoundly pragmatic, material truth and scientific truth, these tools that we've developed throughout the civilization that are so unbelievably powerful, that we've developed these unbelievably sophisticated infrastructures, right? At every level, political arrangement, socioeconomic structures, although a lot of them could be like hugely modified, as we can see with the protests and stuff, but we've developed them, right? And we can say to a certain extent, relative to other nations, other globes, they're functioning, and they're very highly functioning. And we have these political systems and these tremendous biomedical infrastructure, especially within the US, not maybe great at the distribution of the distribution of the actual component of health to a greater population. But if you look at publications in PubMed, if you look at any kind of scientific publications, like US dominates in the output of tremendous novelty in research in every area, from biomedical, even psychological, social, So what's so interesting about the US culture of research in healthcare, or in almost any field, is that you build up research that can tremendously impact the entire globe. The paradox is that then you have these socioeconomic, social structures that almost prevent the very people who live in this country benefit from these kind of research. That's the kind of issue. I think we can talk later. But getting back to COVID and the notion of truth, you can see that you're unbelievably powerful, right? You have these scientific notions of truth and objective ones, the ones that we can measure. And we can look at XY planes and look at the input and then predict the trajectory of this kind of movement. Like we have these amazing tools. And you see with just new novel arrangement of few biomolecules, the COVID-19, all of that is completely interrupted. And we are like left in this decaying structure where we're completely unable to deal with it, right? Especially US. I mean, we've just been unbelievably catastrophic in the way of dealing with it.
From various points. And I think that the feeling of like hopelessness, or even look on the good days, it's very like we can with a good amount of confidence, not saying that it's with a great amount of certainty, we can predict what tomorrow is going to be like. And right now it's like you don't even know what 30 minutes from now it's going to be like sometimes.
And totally. And getting back to your point about truth, is like what I was trying to emphasize is that with COVID-19, you really get to see
the
essence of what truth actually means and what's the utility of it. You have all this sort of scientific truth, but that doesn't help people who are at home during COVID-19, which tells you so vividly, like the most irrepressible way, where there are truths to live by, and then there are objective truths. And what that means is that you have to divorce these two concepts. One is that the objective truth of things, the scientific credibility and the objective capacity we have in claiming truths in this objective scientific way, is completely trivial to the truth people need to live day by day, and to the way they need to conduct their lives to deal with catastrophes like this. For example, you could say, like, what are some truths that you can live by that would allow you to have a stable cognition throughout the time of COVID, or a life that is stable enough that you can go through COVID and the protest without being psychologically damaged and being able to be intact. And that's where a whole completely different notion of truth comes in, because it's not objective. It's not this materialistic, tangible thing. It's far more visceral and intangible. It's part psychological, part mythological, part spiritual. This is where the truth that we've established as a society that so favors materialism and scientific structures that you're able to tangibly see and observe. This is where you see we need to almost deviate from that if we want to survive during difficult times. Not so much deviate, but almost you have to add and encapsulate it with another kind of truth, which is the spiritual and the intangible, and the truth that would arm you to deal with the unbelievable difficulties of life. And COVID may be unique in that it's tremendously difficult for the entire globe, for the entire country, but it's very likely that once COVID is over, you will face that difficulty in smaller fragments throughout your own life. And I was just gonna say,
but that's the trouble that I have with it. I think it comes from a psychological perspective, in which is like, you know, the despair or the void or the questions about meaning or existence, that, you know, even like is there good in the midst of all this? Like, does God exist? Whatever the questions originate, I feel like those sense of those existential questions that really help us go through life in a meaningful way, they're always in us. And Kierkegaard makes a great point. He says, you know, I've already talked about this, but, you know, the guy says he loves swimming and swimming is his life, and that if he couldn't swim, life would be worthless. And then one day he gets in a car crash and he breaks both. He can't swim because of what happens to his body. And he says, there's no point to my life. Kierkegaard will make a point that feeling of despair, of void, was always in that person, even when they were swimming, but they were distracted from the fact that they were swimming. And I don't want to say COVID is a wake-up call, but in a way, it proved this point that, like, this questions that we all have as individuals, they're there, but without COVID, when everything seems to be functioning properly, or at least better to a degree than now, we have so many distractions from the daily basis with our work, relationships, problems, goals, failures, etc., that we forget, or it helps us not have to really look at it or questions ourselves those things. And that's why I said, you know, people have been able to at least experience some boredom, because I really think it's in that moment of boredom that those things come up. And I truly say this with confidence, and I may be wrong in certain aspects, but even some of the problems that we see in society, morally and constructive as a society, in the way individuals interact and building a better society, it comes from this feeling that we all have inside of us, that we try to, like, just push it off from dealing with. Even past experience, psychological experience that damaged us. You know, these things come up right now. And I think that when we try to live in a way that it seems that everything you get to pick and choose, it does not help you from an individual perspective. It only delays the process of growth, of wisdom, gathering in knowledge, but also it does not help us as a society, because if it's not to say that we don't get to believe in different things or think that, you know, other things are true. I think we should all be in the pursuit of truth, but to say that everything is truth, or that truth doesn't exist, or even to say that everything is subjective. You know, we have the beauty of logic, logic is a beauty that we get to experience as individuals. And for you to even make a statement, everything is subjective, you actually already break your statement because you're making an objective claim saying that everything's subjective.
Yeah, I feel like you're almost like, I don't know, directly or indirectly moving us toward the topic of moral relativism, because that is the claim in some part within the structure of moral relativism is there any kind of truth, or is everything subjective? And so I did my honors contract thesis on this, and it was essentially about like the critique of moral relativism, like from a psychobiological framework. And there's a specific reason for that, because morality, as insofar it's useful or has any utility, is it serves not only the structure of the culture in which you live or the proximity of your own life within your family, but very much so confronts your life, and how you interact with others almost directly affects the future narrative of your own life. There's tremendous pragmatic utility in conducting yourself in a moral way, not merely because society expects you to, or not merely because people within the proximity of your life value and benefit from that, but because it takes away what needs to be washed away, and it puts in place what needs to be remained in place. And the issue with moral relativism is that, for example, and you see that within the political sphere a lot of times propagating about we should be tolerant of other cultures, and we should be tolerant of other viewpoints within the domain of morality, and we should be tolerant of different moral systems because they're arising from different viewpoints. I would have to say that, well, that is actually quite paradoxically incorrect, because if you say there are different value systems, different moral systems, the claim that we should be tolerance itself is a moral claim that seems to be existing across all the people who claim moral relativism. So tolerance, the underlying motivation in some ways for moral, there's twofold. One is you want to be tolerant of other cultures, which is good intention, but it's not quite well placed, because for you to want to be tolerant of other cultures, the notion of tolerance itself is a moral virtue. And I think it's a very useful and noble one, because we're living in an increasing multicultural system. So it is very important for you to brush up on very different cultures from very different regions and from very different historical contingencies. But the main point is that if you actually look at anthropological research, the fact that there are very different cultures with very different moral viewpoints, that's actually incorrect. You see underlying structures of all of these very different cultures have very similar converging moral viewpoints.
And the notion of Lewis makes a great point of that, because he said, I studied all cultures, all geographics, and the notion that they're, in the surface, they may seem completely different, but if you look at their foundation, they're like extremely similar. And as if, from a Judeo-Christian perspective, Paul says that this rule of morality is written in our hearts, and there seems to be a proper, I guess, case for that. It seems like, and even Jordan Peterson in his book Maps of Meaning, he makes a great point about that. He says that, and even Nietzsche says that the theory of the Judeo-Christian, it actually affirms, because there's the presupposition and then there's the trying to carry that theory. And if the theory breaks, the presupposition is wrong. But when in the case of the Judeo-Christian view, it actually stands, because he says that even the atheist who says that, the Judeo-Christian is all fairy tale, he carries his life as if those moralities was to be true. He goes through society and he does not kill his neighbor, and he goes through society, and if he lies, he tries to hide it, which points to the shame of the individual from the Judeo-Christian perspective. So it's as if in our culture, we have, at least in the Western culture, we have run from, let's say, religion, or run from morality, and we expect it to, because we said that those things were actually keeping us from being free. But that's when I think that people look at freedom from a very simplistic way, and I think freedom is a lot more complex than we think. I think that freedom, it has constraints, and freedom actually is this discipline that you constrain yourself. Because if we, even looking at this tolerance that you're talking about, if there's so much polarity, so much diversity, I think that it's going to be chaotic. Like all aspects of structures will fall down. I think if there's no, and I think it's not even possible for us to bring that into reality, because I think, as you said, like if you look at the foundation, it's very similar. It's as if we try to run from those principles, but somehow through history and time, we always fall back upon them.
Yeah, totally. And the thing is, like, I just want to make a point that the notion of diversity is, I would say, in my opinion, is in some ways necessary, right? Because whether people can accept it or not, you're moving in this dimension where, like, it's so much more powerful to encapsulate different cultures within one framework, which what makes, in some ways, the US such an unbelievably powerful force, right? Because like even at that unconscious level nowadays, you have to perceive certain viewpoints of a very different culture in order for you to engage and interact with this multiculturalistic environment. But the underlying moral structures are in fact the same, and that's precisely why we are functioning in this way. Not perfectly, not the maximal way, but the underlying moral structures are very similar, and that's very important, because the other underlying motivation for moral relativism, to me, it seems like rationalization. And if you notice and pay attention within the purview of your own life, you realize it is very possible for you to engage in an incorrect moral fashion, and immediately, just moments within like your solar plexus, you almost immediately come up with this rationalization of why you did it the way you did, right? And imagine you have this relationship with your dad. It's been like very fruitful, very amazing for 20, 30 years. And it gets to a point where you've engaged in a kind of action in life where it's difficult for you to tell the truth reasonably. So you do lie very directly. And we can define what defines lie. I'll define it for you. The most clear way is that you engage in this moral transgression, and imagine you want to study that very night. You're at home, you want to study now. Why is it becomes increasingly difficult for you to study? Because this thought of you having lied and this rationalization that comes, it just constantly encapsulates your cognition. You're overthinking it, and it bothers you. You can't focus. And what's the question? Yeah. Why can't you focus? Why is it that there's these very complex emotions? Guilt is a very complex emotion, like neurobiologically speaking. It requires cognitive control, it requires all kinds of things. And why is it that you feel guilty, right? Imagine like there is no culture, no social structure in your life, but it still doesn't explain why you're so in this constant collision with your own cognition. It's like almost partitioned in two. You're like, why did I lie? Why did I tell him this? He's done all these things for me. Why does this conflict exist? And why is it that the moment, the next day or the next week, you develop the courage to tell your dad the truth or tell your own friends the truth? Why is it that this very complex, intricate emotion or this complex moral dilemma that you're having vanishes? Why is it that it dissipates and evaporates and it's gone once you tell the truth? I mean, like, you don't have to read a book. You don't have to engage in tremendous philosophical work to notice that, right? You just need to pay attention. And if you engage in that action and if you pay attention in your life, pay attention to the moment you've deceived that person, if you notice, you'll see like why it's not so subjective as you think, because there are physiological changes that occur within you once you tell the truth and once you deceive. I mean, it's really interesting. I don't have to read a book. I don't have to listen to anyone. I don't have to engage in these long philosophical discussions about truth. I can just notice that within my own life, and it's just mind-boggling to me. It's unbelievable why that feeling goes away once you tell the truth. And I think that brings up to your point where, like, is there truth, is there not? You don't have to ask the question, just like engage in this action and you'll see. And I mean, for example, like I took a lot of medical ethics courses in college because I was always really interested in ethics. And we've read these articles about should doctors tell the truth or not. And these very deep and intense philosophical frameworks. And to me, it was just really interesting because, like, what's the point of reading this? It doesn't make sense if you can't tell the truth within your friends at this very moment, like within this few months, at the very point you're living in as an undergrad. What makes you think you can do that at that point? It's not just some sort of button or article you read and then you can conduct it in your job as a physician. Like it requires articulate and very precise sculpting over the years for you to be able to do that. And if you're not practicing that within your own life as an undergrad, as someone early in med school, like, it's not so clear to me how you can make that jump once you're interacting with a patient or within your occupation. So these things aren't simple and they're not easily changeable. And that to move away from that, to say things are subjective and truth is subjective, there's tremendous danger in that, not just for societal narratives, but for your own life. And
because to me, to say that you're gonna be carried like a wind, you will be a wind. You know, you're gonna always change the scenario or the narrative to play out in a way that makes sense for you, so you can cover up that guilt. Let's say, for example, because here's the funny thing with lies, right? You tell one lie, and either you come clean, or in order to keep the lie, you need to lie. Let me give you an example. Let's say I come to you and I say, Matthew, dude, I made $100,000. And you're like, wow, Pedro, I'm so proud of you. Great. And then tomorrow you're like, Pedro, something came up. I don't know what went wrong. I need to pay a fee to UCLA of $10,000. Can you let me borrow? I can literally pay you in 2 weeks. And I said, dude, I can't. And you say, but bro, you told me you made $100,000. And I say, oh, I put it in an investment. I can't liquidate it. So now I made another lie to cover up that lie. And then you say, wow, that's great, man. What investment did you make? Yeah. Now I need to make another lie to keep that. So it's as if I think it's the more you carry on to living in a way in which you cover up that sense of objective truth that we intrinsically have as individuals, that actually harms you. And I think you become a very not necessarily cynic, but like you know you're not following the path that inevitably, not even society tells you, or people from different faiths, like it's as if you're going against your nature. And I think that has very, very catastrophic consequences on the individual level and also in society. Because even with society issues, if we talk about let's say the Black Lives Matter movement, the protests, it's clear that there's inequality. It's clear that there's injustice, not just in police brutality, right? I've read a book on, it's called Every Good Endeavor by Tim Keller. He talks about how Wells Fargo was sued for $200 million because they were giving harsher terms on mortgages to Black individuals that had the same credit score, the same background, the same everything. So it's clear that there's, and it's not just towards the Blacks. People are racist in terms of patriotism. I've seen Brazilians look at those Americans, and Americans looking down on other people too. So I think that racism is a very, I don't want to get too in the topic of this right now, but it's as if if we even talk about the point that I was trying to bring with this is, they say that it's a systematic issue with racism, right? But every system is made up by individuals. So I don't think that like you change the system. What's broken is not necessarily the system, is it the individuals. For example, let's say I went out and protested about the Black Lives Matter movement, but I came back home and in my circle of friends, I started to make racial jokes. Am I really part of change or bringing justice? What's the point of me going out there and trying to connect with a movement if at home I'm not making sure that people are treated with respect? And not only that, it can bring back to the truth. Like, for example, for me as a Judeo-Christian perspective, I have a point of reference to point out to why I should respect you. I should respect Black people the same. It's because in its essence, my belief is that we are all made in the image of God and are worthy of honor and respect. In a secular culture where everything's subjective, where does that human rights come from? That you can point out that why should we respect each other if there doesn't meaning or there's no point to show why we intrinsically have value?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very complex topic, and I think, yeah, it's really difficult to
Grasp that, right?
almost like, yeah, to I mean, the past few weeks have been unbelievably difficult to digest for a variety of reasons. But one is that, people don't take the issue of psychological forces seriously. Is that there are unconscious forces driving you to do things day to day, moment to moment, year by year, that you haven't examined that control the trajectory of your life, that determine the direction that you move in, and like just to witness yourself go through this past few weeks and see how you react, that tells a lot about you. If you're not generally furious at what's been happening, that says something about you that you can examine and see why. And if you don't, I mean, the class of 2020, in my opinion, we are the luckiest ones. I mean, we are truly lucky because more than 6, 7, 8 decades, we've been able to confront most intimately the deficiencies of our culture, and we're able to see with the COVID the fragility that comes with human life and how vulnerable it is and how prone it is to destruction and catastrophe. And I think there's tremendous humility in that. There's tremendous humility in noticing that the greatest minds of history have come up with these systems, and they're deficient, and they're insufficient in all sorts of ways, economic, political, social. And there's so much that we can do as students, and it's almost like this culture is yearning for us to do something profound. And we are lucky in the sense that, a lot of times there are commencement speeches like that come at the dawn of our graduation for many people, and they find it difficult to, like, words don't have the same profound, they are profound, but don't have the same magnitude as confronting something that words represent intimately within your own life. And you see someone give a commencement speech about the difficulties they went through in life or within the scope of their own generation. And every generation is unique in that way, that they have to confront fears of their own. And this person is giving you a speech about what they went through, and you want to resonate with that, right? And you're listening carefully, and you're not talking to your friends, at least hopefully not, when you're listening to this commencement speech, and it's still part of you can't fully resonate with that, like, so deeply that you can. But with everything that's been going on the past few months, like, you can't help but resonate with what's going on because you are most directly affected by this. And what's so paradoxical is that regardless of where you stand in political spectrum, where you stand in the socioeconomic structures, and where you stand in any issue, really, you're not impervious to everything that's been going on. Like, your opinions and your decisions and your viewpoints will affect you directly throughout this issue, regardless of how strong you feel about certain issues. So it's like, even if you're someone who isn't the most if you don't have that built into you, that you want to care for others and you want to improve the lives of those around you as well as your own, you're still not impervious to the tremendous danger that's awaiting you. Because as this class, we get to see, like, these are the deficiencies that lie within these landscapes. And I think this is the most inspiring commencement speech, because you get to, like, realize, wow, there's just so much that needs to be done. And me coming out of graduation, I'm like, as a person, you're like, there's so much that I can do, and there's so much that needs repair, and maybe I can do something in some way about that within the purview of my own life and within once I go outside. So I to be honest, I am very grateful to, like, be part of this class. I mean,
I'm proud of you.
Yeah,
bro.
I feel like there's just so much that you can you almost cannot skip it. You have to confront it.
Yeah.
Everything that's going on, it's like it's not so much that it demands you to confront
Yeah.
it. It's almost like
Mm-hmm.
you've inevitably collided with everything that's going on, and if you want a future that is stable enough for you or for your own kids to live, like, you have to confront it. And another thing about COVID is, like, now you get to see, like, the necessity of keeping the environment in a structural and stable locus. And you see how the moment you diverge from that in the slightest, like, it will have a complete control over our entire infrastructure. And anyone who was in the slightest skeptical about environmental issues, about environmental laws, and they're still skeptical. And you get to see what it's like if you deviate from the policies that have to be embedded within corporations as well as institutions. If you deviate from that the slightest, if you deviate from the need that you want to reform, you see the effects of that. And I just think, like, almost pick any issue in politics, in any issue in politics that you want, you see how the past few months, they have some sort of realization about that. And I think that is incredibly rare and incredibly profound. So I'm just very grateful.
Yeah, it's a crazy time. And, you know, Ravi Zacharias brought us such a good point, right? A lot of times in life, we look at things that let's say we don't, we dislike. Let's say it's a political issue or an issue with injustice. And we try to take out fences, you know, we try to be revolutionary, try to take out fences. And even bring into the aspect of medical and structure environmental, it's like, if there is a fence somewhere and you try to take it off, before you take it off, always ask yourself first, why was it put it there in the first place? You know, unfortunately, we live in a culture, I think, where there's no boundaries anymore. We lack this ability to say enough is enough, and we lack this ability to identify that there's issues from various spectrums in various areas, both individually, societal, and it can be very overwhelming. Even with, you know, we made a joke when I asked you about getting coffee, so many options, but it's true. Like, we live in this world where there's so much to do, experiences. You know, I was even watching a show with my mom yesterday, and, you know, the guy's going to Venice and he's eating at all these restaurants, and I'm just like, I've never been to Europe. Like, what am I doing with my life? You know, like, I need to visit all those places. I need to write down those places. I need to go. And we have this ability to make our experience so not even we don't even enjoy. There's this emotion that it's in us that we need to change everything today. There's like this lack of patience in our generation to understand that both individually and as a whole, things take time to change, and it's a reorientation both of our own lives, but also about educating other people. If we have a good idea that could bring better aspects to the table, it's very complex. I think that when we say, you know, life is easy, but humans make it complicated. Like, no, life is not easy at all. And life is very complicated and it's very complex. And you can look at all aspects from you know, physical to material to philosophical to psychological. Wow, psychological, let's not even get there. It's like, it's crazy, man. And I think that, you know, what you and we can do having this conversation, and for people that listen to this, it's first accept that there are problems, obviously, that there are issues that we need to do something about, both in your own life and also in our society and in our culture, our generation, and how we go and do something about those things, right? Jordan Peterson says, like, we say there is, and then what to do about there is. So, you know, science, for example, can answer what is there, Now, it can tell you that you know you're there, but why is it that you're there, right? It lacks that, and I think that if we don't have these conversations, you know, so many times I've seen people our age, and I try to not even try to get philosophical or anything or spiritual, none of that, but a lot of people rebel against it. You know, like, oh, I don't want to have that type of talk. Like, can we just enjoy our coffee or whatever? And I think that's one of the problems. Is like a lot of times we love to talk about, oh, this would fix things, but we never really dissect and identify the problem. And I truly believe that it's very easy for us to go look at, try to change the world, as Jordan Peterson says. It feels so good. Right, like I'm gonna create this movement and we're gonna change lives and we're gonna change the way things are happening. But the problem with that is that the real problem is in the individual, and it's a constant battle. And the more order we can bring, to kind of, he says that culture brings order. Jordan Peterson talks about that in the Maps of Meaning, that culture brings order, and that's why we can never disregard culture, because disregarding culture and throwing it away, it's as if we're bringing all the chaos back. And dude, we do not want that. Trust me. And that brings me to this question that I have for you. It's like, what do you think are, you know, we can say vices. What do you think are some of the characteristics you've seen in our generation, in the individual level, that you've seen that are just not beneficial to that person's future, or to just our generation as a whole, both as a role model for people that are coming behind us, but also as us building the future of this nation or of our lives?
Yeah, it's a complex question, because I think it's twofold. I think what can we do differently about the way we confront the structure of our society, and what needs to be changed, I actually believe so, directly within the structure of the society. And I think the two have to coexist. I think those changes have to be gradual, incremented, and they have to coexist in a way where they're not disruptive to the other ones. And what I mean by that is that within the educational system, for example, like I had the fortune of, even though I was a pre-med, I was taking all sorts of biological courses, organic, biochem. I had the privilege of sitting in very different lectures in ethics, philosophy, in psychology, sociology, in like anthropology, and so many different courses, so many different perspectives, and Greek history, and all these things. It's not so clear how the courses themselves or the institution by itself gives you sufficient resources to confront the future or to change something within a structure of a society. And you can get into amazing institutions like UCLA or Princeton, Stanford, all these amazing schools, and USC. I didn't specifically leave that out, but you can get into these schools, right? And there are people who go through that and they come outside completely unchanged. Their parents and themselves invested so much in their education. And it's not so clear it's contingent on any specific degree. It's not that at all. It's that you go through these unbelievably powerful, unbelievably useful institutions that have so much to offer, and you come out not in the slightest change or concerned about changes that need to happen simultaneously within the structure of your own life and within dimensions of society. And I do mean both exist. And you see the societal one definitely the past few months, but you also see the personal one the past few months, is that how rich your life is if you can't go outside, if you can't interact with people outside of life, and you feel like you're not getting enough out of the structure of life. How much have you actually invested within the structure of life? Because it also explains that you have to have the capacity to be stripped off of social interactions and still be able to find life rich and meaningful, which I think you can if you pay attention, because like there's so much to be grateful for. There's so much beauty even staying at home. You can invest time in family. You can discover all sorts of things by paying attention. So I don't buy the argument of you're stripped of our sanity by not being outside. I don't think that's true. But getting back to your point, that so you go outside of the institutions, and many people, I guess partially people within the proximity of my own life, and I'm not insusceptible to this, very much susceptible to this, that you come outside of the institution. If you go, and if you've been properly educated, and if you're paying attention, you should be motivated beyond belief, and not only angered, but just so excited and so unbelievably like ready and excited and full of energy and gravitas to go out and confront the issues of your culture, the deficiencies of your culture. And having gone to these institutions, being able to take these unbelievably rich courses, and if you're attentive there, and if you're in there with this sublime, this subtle interactions you have during office hours with your professors, or this interactions you have with your friends, if paying attention at all, you have to be motivated beyond belief to go out and fix it, and see what is also deficient within your own life. And I feel like what's missing in our culture is that, you know, a lot of times, and there are valid reasons for that, but like I feel like there's tremendous, I think this is also part of the institutional problem, where like there's so much stress and anxiety and pressure on you being an institution, wanting to get a good grade, or wanting to demonstrate competence in this peculiar oriented way that the university demands of you and your parents and your structure of society, that you forget to actually experience the richness of being in an undergraduate system, or being in this age, frankly, that there's so many toolbox to be added. There's so many like intimate personal changes that can be made. Wow. I feel like the seriousness of that is just taken away, part voluntarily, but also I get the locus of focus like is almost being like involuntary in some ways, like being pushed towards getting the proper competence scales and not on the personal ones. And that's one of the issues. Like, I think what our generation, like you said, I think there are a lot of issues, and it's not so clear how like there's one specific one, but they intercorrelate. But one is, what I was saying is that like you have to take like the richness of these years, these formative years, very seriously, because there's so much that could be untangled from it. And I feel like the time for reflection isn't as much as it could be. And the other,
you brought a good point in terms of the finding out the meaning and richness of life, even when you're at home and you're kind of restricted or constrained from doing specific things that you do on a daily basis that seems so natural to you. And there is a possibility to see life as rich and meaningful and filled with, you know, bliss and beauty. And I think when people rebel against that look or perspective of life, they're not really saying that they can't find meaning or truth or beauty or satisfaction in staying at home. I think the problem is that it's the pleasure seeking. We live in you know, our generation is filled, it's a hedonistic culture, man. And here's the problem is that the structure, the institution, the government, the ability to get pleasure in your hands so possible that the individual is in a way an addict. And what I really hear by that saying that you said, you know, like I need to go outside, I can't experience anything, I'm going crazy, in which I have even said it. What I'm really saying is like I can sit down and think more about myself and the realities of this world and about myself or how I haven't been competent or how I have this opportunity to go to school and maybe I didn't make anything out of it because I lacked gratitude to see that, you know, it's not everyone gets this opportunity or all these things that originate from silence, right? Because the problem with silence, it talks too much and we don't like what he says. And what I really hear when people saying I can't, like I'm going crazy, it's that it's like I'm not experiencing the type of pleasure in which I wish, and I cannot live this way a second longer. That's one of the big issues that I see in our generation, is this constant the kind of what guides you is the pleasure. So I hear so much in the self-help talk, it's like do what you're passionate about. But the passion is not, it's not talking about this period of like the joy that, like, for example, in which the Judeo-Christian mentions the joyful of heart, that it's not correlated with circumstances of life, that whether you're suffering, right? It's an internal joy. It's not this type of passion. It's a passion that we experience really, like, for example, when you first discover coffee, you take one sip of the coffee and it's amazing. You take the second one, it's good. The more you take it, the less significant it becomes. And that's how the problem that I see in our culture is, that in any pursuit, even relationships, I see so many guys, and I've been there. It's like you start dating a girl, or you start having, casual relationship with someone, and after a certain period of time, you disregard this person. Why? Because that pleasure vanishes, or that passion, that fervent passion, the erotic passion vanishes. And I see the same going into careers. People are like, I don't feel like this is for me anymore, because they expect this feeling of happiness, or this feeling of pleasure to be constant. Or if it's not present to the quantity that they would prefer, they will stop whatever they're doing. So they'll put an end on that career or that relationship or that pursuit in order to search for something that can fulfill that pleasure seeking faster than what they're originally doing would bring to them. So that's another issue, like another problem that I see culturally, because but there's still like this honor shame culture here even in the United States. But I think that we're much more of a hedonistic culture, and it's really taking place, I think, in our generation. I really see it. What do you think? Do you think would you agree with me when it comes to this? Or
yeah, there's definitely like those certain dimensions, and I think that's part of just the availability of things, right? I mean, it's just so convenient for us to get what we want so easily, especially things that are not so clear, that they're difficult to obtain. I mean, you talk about coffee, like everything is so available to you so suddenly, right? There are these amazing infrastructures, Amazon, and these infrastructures that make it so easy for you to obtain the things you want, and for you to take moment to moment pleasure, hedonistic ones. But you bring a lot of philosophers, like obviously, like there are eudaimonic pleasures, Aristotelian pleasures, and it's very interesting because, I mean, Aristotle is a very interesting case, because you see, like, it's very coincident with the neuroscientific theories we have, is that once you succumb to these easy temptations, especially during COVID, you start the day with 3 hours on Instagram, or you spend the entire day on Facebook, or you don't even notice how that you're in this timeless incubator, and before you know it, the entire day has gone, and you say, why is it so difficult for me to do any work? Part of it is like, it's so funny how a philosopher thousands of years ago it comes up with these notions that are in complete parallels with our neurobiology, and is that every moment, every time you succumb to a temptation, it's that much easier for you to not succumb to it the next time. So every action is unbelievably powerful. If you start every day doing something so high dopaminergic, something so highly stimulating, of course, it's very difficult for you to do anything productive afterwards, or do anything productive the next day, because all of your circuitry is being sculpted in this way for you to only do things that give you moment to moment to pleasure. And it's that much more difficult for you to go below, because if all you're doing is feeding yourself momentary pleasure, the only sustainable thing is to do something that is slightly more pleasurable. And that would be like internet pornography, and having that so readily available, I feel like that is definitely it's very pernicious elements, because at that point it's not an expression of something healthy. It's almost needing that stimulation, and doing that and getting to that. And to your point, just to finish stuff, is that once you get there, it's like there are very few things that you want to do that are less stimulating, right? It's very difficult to do that and spend your day entirely in that, and now go read a book or send a very difficult and tricky email, because like your cognition is not framed in this productive way anymore. And if you do that for a week and a month, that changes like the entire narrative of how you will conduct yourself the next month.
Psychologically too.
So part of what you say, like about our generation, I feel like this almost global and cross-generational, is that you have to take seriously like the consequences of moment-to-moment action, because they affect very directly the next cascade of actions. And like you engaging in those actions, imagine if you're someone who's 40 years old even. I'm going to say cross-culture because like when it's become so much more difficult for you to do like something less stimulating but far more meaningful. Like you go do stuff like that for hours. It's very difficult for you to spend time in the garden, maybe with your own kids, with your own parents. And that's the danger of it. You're not taking seriously how contingent one action is upon the next. And this has got nothing to do with like how you perceive life or how you want to approach the difficulties of life, or it's got nothing to do with anything but like mere examination of how that affects your motivation day to day. Like you get to see that so intimately. So that's the issue. Yeah. That's the issue.
I'm fascinated by how you approach things. It's very cool to see. Yeah, I agree. I think that, the point that you brought out, it's kind of like a domino effect, the way we approach our day. It's like you don't eat, let's say your goal is to eat healthy, and that eating healthy takes place in eating an apple. If you don't eat the apple, you probably won't read the book. And if you don't read the book, you probably won't be nice to people, because you're going to have that guilt inside of you that you're not being productive. And that guilt itself is going to push you towards doing another thing. So maybe you go watch pornography to cover up that guilty for the fact that you did nothing with your day. And then covering up the guilty that you wasted your time watching pornography, you're going into Instagram to try to forget about that. So it's like, it's a very domino effect that if you said it beautifully, it's like you need to be cautious with your moment-to-moment interactions. And I think it's so important for what you tell yourself, like, in your conscious, because you're always talking to yourself, and those things that you're going to accept about yourself are going to be very crucial to how your day or your life is going to play out. And we can discuss so much more. I think we're going to have a second episode.
Yeah, sure. And one question that remains after all of this is like, what can be done? And I think there's many things that actually can be done.
So let's give maybe 2 or 3 actionable steps that we think that someone who's going to listen to this, because even this, like, it can be very pessimistic to hear about all these problems, but I think that it's actually very optimistic to talk about problems, because I think even something that I've found about myself, I don't want to speak for others, that I think it's very common, is that the more I try to analyze the wrongdoings or the ways that I'm not satisfied about myself, and I try to identify those problems, the more that my conscience starts on working to bring a solution to that. I think staying quiet and silent or trying to disregard the problems is really that's really being pessimistic about it. So what would you say it's an actionable step that someone can take to...
Yeah, totally. And I guess I have this platform, which I feel grateful to talk about. One thing I would say, I don't want to talk about something that I think is personally very practical. It wouldn't serve anyone. I feel like when I say some things that are so pragmatic and they're supported by all these domains of science and all these structures within domains of science. And one thing that I can say is meditation and breathing meditation is unbelievably powerful. I spent actual time studying it, doing research, and obviously practicing it, and being all sorts of these clubs and programs that we conduct meditation. And we actually did some during COVID, and it just tells you something, is that this tool, breathing meditation, which is increasingly being dispersed in clinical psychology, in psychiatry, in all sorts of systems within the biomedical stratosphere, but also within the military, within educational institutions, even within kids. And there's tremendous amount of research being conducted in it globally. Yeah. And there are tremendous outputs from research being done on it. I mean, every neuroscientist being increasingly more gravitated toward doing research in meditation. And with fMRI technology coming out, like they're trying to see the neural mechanisms and all of that, and there's tremendous effects on that. And I don't want to talk about like the neurological changes or the biological ones, but I want to say that they exist, and I want to talk about the psychological effects, not only during this time, but for the rest of time, and which is that breathing meditation is so unbelievably powerful. Mm-hmm. It's powerful beyond comprehension. And if you practice engage in a habit like that, just the way you start your day like this, it has unbelievable, indescribable changes within the structure of your own life, day to day, moment to moment. Because you can think of like, there's all sorts of beautiful things you can do in your life or engage, right? Volunteering and volunteering clinics and working in a hospital and volunteering at a hospital, helping out a friend and all of those things. And they're so satisfying and meaningful, right? But they end at a period, right? And there are times where you can't do those, right? There are times where you're at a danger where you can't engage in that kind of action, especially during COVID. So you need something that's so sustainable that that no one can take away from you, right? It's not contingent upon any economic structure as is the case during COVID, not societal ones or political ones. It's so personal, and it's there and it's convenient in front of you. And meditation, I'm going to say it coupled with exercise, is so unbelievably powerful. And if you start your day that way, there's a tremendous, there's just so much you begin to notice about the purview within your own life that you didn't need to notice before as a result of engaging in those habits. Because you start your day in that way, or the middle of the day, it's like, obviously it reduces all sort of stress hormones and all of that, and you feel calmer and all of that. But more than that, you begin to see the subtle beauties of life and the subtle investments that need to be made. Like purely as a result of that practice, all sorts of beauties about life emerge, and all sorts of, you talk a lot about changes in this podcast, what can be done as a person, societally, individually, like all those things, believe it or not, it's counterintuitive to think that way, that a practice would reveal so much about political issues, social issues, and personal issues. But it's so true, because what it does, it like water and sand, it washes away what is so inessential in life, and it brings out what is so deeply essential. And you begin to see that your interactions with your loved ones, when you leave the door, or when you come to work and you sit at home, when you're just there and there's nothing you're watching, there's so much richness in these moments, and there's so much to pay attention in these moments. And you begin to see structures of beauty in life that you've never seen before, and you begin to actually be present within your moment-to-moment experience. And the power of that is that then you begin to see that with COVID or not COVID, with protesting and not protesting, and with everything that's going on, what doesn't change is your conscious experience moment to moment. And if you can some way alter that, if you can pay attention to your life in a much more clear way, then that changes dramatically how you literally experience life. And you begin to see that each moment is sacred, and there's so much within each moment. And if I'm just paying attention to it, I'm not overly thinking about the conversations I had moments ago or the things I have to do. If just there, like, so much clarity comes, and that clarity will aid you in all sorts of practical, pragmatic issues that are facing the conundrums of your life. And that is one thing you can do that is so practical that you can't debate me about this, and you can't debate your friends or family or yourself about it. It's there in front of you, and there's all sorts of resources allocated to it that you can access. And after this podcast, if anyone comes up, wants to know about the resources for that, I'll be more than glad to do it. So you can debate about all sorts of things that you can do in your life, but you can't debate about the fact that there are very clear things that you can do to improve your life.
Wow, that's beautiful. I think an advice that I would give, even coming back a little bit to the moment of like really finding the beauty of life, even in moments like this, I really think that it relates to, self-worth as an individual, because if your self-identity is in, let's say, your work, I'll give you an example. For me, with my short-term rental properties, I took huge damage. Like I lost, three out of the properties out of my portfolio. I lost, thousands and thousands of dollars. If my whole self-worth as an individual was in being a real estate investor, I would commit suicide, or I would be in despair right now. And I think that's a huge problem that we have in society. And I think that the antidote to that is realizing that, I don't want to get too much in a spiritual or faith outlook that, you're made in God's image. But if that helps you, never forget that, because if you have that before any societal position that you take place, whether as a brother, a friend, or as a medical student, or as a student, whatever it is that society will identify you, whatever label you put on yourself, your color, before any of that, before being a real estate investor, before being whatever it is that you are, don't forget that you're a human and you have value. Because if the more you put your worth in those aspects of society, and those are all things that can be taken from you. And I think only when you come back to the essence that you're human before it all, that it brings the same clarity that you're talking about from the meditation, because you pass along to see the essence of life. And that's one of the important things that I learned. And I'll be completely vulnerable. I was so focused on my work, so dedicated that it was so self-centered, to the point that it was not even there to serve people or to contribute toward a greater good with the partners that I had or people that I came in with interaction with my work. It was all about myself. And I think what this quarantine taught me is that the intention of my relationships, how crucial it is for me to sit down next to you right now and actually listen to you, and not just think about what I'm going to say after you say something, and being present. And I think that you can only do that if you know that before anything or what anyone tells you or any position in society, that you're human and you're valuable. And if you have that presupposition, then you'll be able to pass on to see how even this moment is actually intrinsically super important, just as important as the moment when you had everything in place or you thought you had in place. So just before we final up, you've mentioned already a habit of yours, which is the breathing meditation. I need to even research more of that. You sold me. But, what is a book that you say transformed your life, or a book that means a lot to you?
Yeah, it's When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. And, I read this book so many times, and actually so long ago. And kind of the first time I read it, I made this internal commitment to read it like once a year. And so interesting that you read a book, right? And the next time you read it,
get something else, right?
So much of what you get out of a book is like contingent on like the framework of how you're living life at that moment, right? Like if you read Brother Karamazov, it's like so much of what you get out of that book is like the kind of state you're in life once you're reading that book. And that's what makes books so like something really divine, is that like they tap into so intimately to what you're going through in life during those moments. And I think this book is just something that did that for me so many times. And I guess I should say what it is. It's, people can look up what it is unless you want me to talk about it, but
yeah, you can just give a little brief summary of what it meant to you. Because as you said, it might mean something to you, but the person who may be reading it may come with a different narrative because they're in a different stage or different circumstances in their lives.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to talk about, things that everyone can decipher, at least, not particularly like oriented toward me. Ones that you begin to see that, like, Paul was a neurosurgeon who was so immersed in philosophy and literature and all of that, and then he's in this amazing position to actually directly alter the lives of those around him. And he used to work at Stanford Hospital, and it's funny, the way he describes it is so amazing, because he talks about how tables can so quickly be changed, is that he would talk about. So he would go to these rooms during his residency rotations where you bring a patient in this room, give him this cap and gown, and put him in this chair, and use this monitor to tell them about their carcinogenic, their cancerous state, and they would talk about the kind of neurosurgical techniques they want to use to try to get rid of that brain cancer. And he would talk about how, like, if there's a neurological deficiency, like, these are the things that you can do. And as he was doing these things through his final year of residency, he himself got diagnosed with cancer. And the next day, he's sitting in that very table that he used to examine patients. He's wearing that same gown in the same room that he has the login and username password for that very same computer. And he's sitting there waiting for his diagnosis at that very same room. And that is also a cancer that deals with the the nervous system, and in some ways. And you get to see how quickly tables can change, and how quickly you rotate dimensions in life. And now he has to deal with the fundamental fact that he's facing death, and what kind of life is really worth having in these final months. And he begins to question the entire trajectory of his life and his reflections on life. It's like the entire book is really mostly not about his career, merely his career, but like the reflections that comes out of facing death. And I feel like that's the important part. It's amazing to see how, like, someone who's sitting across both tables, someone who has to actually so intimately deal with life and death, as someone who has to use these surgical techniques to deal with it, he's now the one being in different perspectives. Obviously, that has consequences. Now he begins to intimately, like, experience what it's like to be a patient, but also, like, what it's like to be a person, and how do you want to leave these final months? Because you can think one way to leave them would be to try to immerse yourself in work and writing, or one way would be to spend time with family. If anyone is interested in facing that fact that you begin to question that sometime soon, I highly recommend it. I think it's powerful.
Yeah, I'm gonna
words.
read it.
Yeah.
I looked it up, and it sounds profound. I'm gonna read it now. Matthew, if some people want to reach you, which how would, if I was listening to this, I would. Well, how can they reach you?
It's a great question. I give them my email. I think, are you gonna put that up, or I'll just say it? It's Matthew Abi@g.ucla.edu.
Yeah, I'll also put it in the description of the podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you, dude. It was an honor to have you.
My pleasure. I feel so grateful to be able to talk to you and say something during this unbelievably incomprehensible times, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you, dude. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Hey there. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. I highly encourage you to go ahead and take the content in which you have just listened to and apply it into your life. I think it's very important for us as individuals to not just watch or listen to content, but actually get those ideas and concepts and lessons and apply it into our lives. Now, I would also request you to send us feedback. If you've liked today's episode, or if you have not, please submit some information and tell us why. And also, if you like to hear about a specific subject, please feel free to message us, and we'll go ahead and create content about that specific subject. Or even if you would like me to interview a specific person, make sure to reach me on my social media platforms, whether on my YouTube or my Instagram or my Facebook. I would love to, start a conversation with you and gain some feedback in what you guys are thinking about the podcast. So thank you so much, and I hope you continue working on becoming the best version of yourself.